Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to baseball at beautiful Wrigley Field.
I go to my commissary, and I go check in, and I grab a load of beer, and head out into the seats and just start selling. Hopefully, it's a good crowd, and just walk around until somebody wants a beer. Everybody is different, and people are great. Whether you're a vendor or a fan, as far as I'm concerned, because I was a fan long before I became a vendor, you're at the ball game. You know, the old saying is a bad day at the ballpark is better than a good day at the office.
Welcome to the Healthy You podcast from NorthShore University Health System, where we tackle trending topics in healthcare. I'm Andy Buchanan. Eddie Rajczyk is back at Wrigley Field this season selling beer to thirsty baseball fans. It's a dream job he wouldn't trade for anything in the world.
I've been a lifelong Cubs fan, so when I started working here, it was like I get to go to Wrigley Field every day and not have to pay for it and then get paid for it.
Eddie's grateful to be seeing another baseball season after suffering a massive heart attack last year, and thankful for the many caregivers who worked furiously to save his life. One of them, cardiologist Robert Gordon, brought his expertise to Eddie's case, but also a unique understanding. Dr. Gordon, too, had been a beer vendor at Wrigley Field as he worked his way through school. So first, can you just tell us your name and where you're from?
Eddie Rajczyk. I just turned 58 about a month ago. And actually, I was originally born in Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Yeah, my name is Robert Gordon, and I'm the director of the heart failure program here at NorthShore.
So when were you a beer vendor? Were you beer vendors at the same time, or no?
No, he said he started in 2003.
2003.
And so I was a vendor at the ballpark from 1984 to 1988.
84, a famous year in Cubs history.
Yep.
Right?
Certainly was, yes.
They made the playoffs and almost the World Series, right? Mm-hmm. How did you get started as a beer vendor? Or you were in medical school at the time, and where were you?
No, I started after my first year of college. It was a summer job, and I was 18 at the time, so I started off as a Coke vendor. Sold a lot of Pepsi, and I think it was Pepsi at Wrigley Field and then Coke at the old Comiskey Park. The summers were great for selling that. The springtime was not so great to sell that.
And so you later then graduated to beer?
Eventually you do. You know, once you hit 21, most people try to move themselves up. My brother probably should have just stayed selling hot dogs. He was a fantastic hot dog vendor. He had, at the time, the hot dogs were $1.25. What are they now?
$7.
$7. And he had a great line. He would just say 4 for $5. And, you know, if you were sitting there, you would buy 4 hot dogs and say, that's a good deal.
And so you kind of worked your way through college doing that?
It did help pay for a lot of, it sure did. It was a summer job, and it was fun because you not only got to work at the ballpark, but it's a magical feeling working, being able to be part of that game, and seeing 100-plus games a summer was great.
So I'm going to jump right in and ask about that day last April, right? Can you just kind of walk us through what happened that day?
Well, I can't tell you from firsthand experience because unfortunately I still have absolutely no recollection of that day or the days after that. My last memory actually was the night before. It was Tuesday, April 3rd. I was actually watching, I think it was a ball game on ESPN. And I went to bed. I woke up what I thought was Wednesday morning. It ended up being Sunday morning or maybe Sunday afternoon. So I lost 5 days. And what apparently happened was I went to the gym that morning, called my brother from the parking lot, and I guess we had a conversation about me not feeling good. And for him, that was quite the red flag because even when I do have a issue or a tweak or a pain or something, I ignore it. And I told him that I'd meet him at home, and he said, no, don't go home, go to the hospital. I guess I said fine, and I started driving. I realized I wasn't going to make it to the hospital. So I saw the police station and stopped, parked my truck and walked in, went to the police officer at the front desk, and told him I wasn't feeling well and collapsed there in the lobby of the Skokie Police Department. And he reacted the way he told me he was trained, grabbed the AED, used it. There's 2 Skokie Fire Departments, and fortunately, one of them is right next door to that Skokie Police Department. And they came over and started working on me and took me to the NorthShore Skokie Hospital. So they worked on me as best as they could and then transferred me over here to Evanston, where I spent, 5 days before I woke up. My last memory was going to bed in my own bedroom. And I open my eyes and I look up and this is not my bedroom. I see things and I see people that I don't. My first thought was I'm having a nightmare. So I closed my eyes again and I counted to 10 and I said, well, when I wake up, this will all be over and I'll be back in my own bed in my own bedroom. I wasn't. I guess I started to get a little panicky and started pulling out tubes and such. So they put me back under. Then I woke up again a few hours later with some familiar faces in the room. Not that helped much. And I couldn't communicate because I had a tube down my throat. Mm-hmm. So here I am in a strange place surrounded by strange people, not knowing what's going on and not being able to communicate my feelings and not being able to ask any questions. So that was a little uncomfortable. And then I remember waking up Monday, and actually the first face I remember is Dr. Gordon's. I'm pretty sure he was in the room when I ended up waking up on Monday, and then we had our first conversation.
And what did he say?
Basically just letting me know what had happened, letting me know where I was at and what was going on, and where I might end up being, depending on how my condition would progress or not.
When you were starting to kind of comprehend what was going on, I could imagine that was difficult. Or what were your feelings at that point? It had to be almost surreal or still kind of unbelievable.
Surreal is a really good word. I've used that word many times in this past year.
And so when did you start thinking, I want to get back to the ballpark? And what was
5 minutes after I woke up.
Really?
Yes, really. Yeah, I like what I do. I really like what I do. I've been a fan my whole life, and getting this job, it was, the only better thing to do at Wrigley Field would be, putting on a uniform and playing center field.
Number 15, third baseman.
But I love being at the ballpark. I love baseball. And in addition to getting back because I enjoy what I do, getting back to work also would have meant a return to normalcy for me. That would have meant that I'm going in the right direction and possibly staying in that right direction.
Mm-hmm. Now, when this happened to you, I imagine you have a lot of buddies who are vendors, and did they kind of really rally around you?
They did.
Yeah,
they did. Actually, the person that I called the night before my heart attack, unfortunately, he wasn't as lucky as I was. I was a pallbearer at his funeral about a month ago.
Really?
And what's ironic is that our orientation, which was back in February, we went out to lunch after orientation, and we talked about this very thing, how he had started feeling things. And as it turns out, I had just had an echo done about a month earlier. The conversation was in the air, and it was a process. As the weeks and the months went by, I obviously was getting stronger. My first game back was July 27th. It was a Tuesday night against Arizona. It was very nerve-wracking. And he had cleared me, he'd cleared me what I think was the week before. And I felt, well, if again, he knows better than anybody what I do. So if his opinion was good enough for me to go back to work, then I felt confident. But that being said, I still had to go out and do it. I take the train into the ballpark. Being in Skokie, I jump on the Swift and then the Red Line, and it was it was a very surreal train ride. not knowing how it was going to turn out. Thinking, am I going back too early? Because then obviously, regressing would not have been fun. It would have been very disappointing. I get there, and everybody knew what had happened to me, even people that I'm not friends with at the ballpark. So when they saw me, it was it was like a homecoming. Obviously, I got a lot of well wishes and a lot of are you ready for this? And I get to my commissary, and I get ready to load up, and a beer load weighs about 30 pounds. Mm-hmm. So I had zero idea how my body was going to respond. So I strap on my case of beer, and I straighten up. I take a step, and it's like, okay, so far so good. And I take, this is literally, I'm starting from scratch. I felt like I was learning how to walk again. There's obviously steps involved. It's not like I'm walking on flat ground. So I actually walked around on the concourse for a while. I wanted to see how I was going to feel. But I got some momentum going, and then I got a little braver, and I started taking some steps. And it, again, like my first day on the treadmill in rehab, I had no idea what was going to happen. I was willing to deal with whatever might happen and deal with the consequences if they weren't going to be good, but it worked out. I could have easily taken the entire year off, and nobody would have said a word. Nobody would have thought otherwise. But I needed to know if I was ready to do this. I didn't want to have any regrets and think, well, maybe I could have at least tried. I had a lot of people watching out for me, which was very comforting. A lot of the supervisors at the ballpark and a lot of my fellow vendors. It was actually pretty funny. Literally every 5 minutes, somebody would pass me. It's like, "Are you okay? You need to sit down. You need something to drink." So that was great. I had a lot of mother hens watching out for me. That was great. Maybe it was, I think, 10 games before I was able to work a complete game. And my first complete game was a night game. Night game cutoffs are earlier than day game cutoffs.
For the beer sales.
Yeah. Night game cutoffs are bottom of the 7th, and for day games, it's bottom of the 8th. That was my next step, working a complete day game, and then working consecutive games.
Did you suggest or think, well, maybe, Eddie, you should get behind a stand and sell beers just standing there instead of strapping on the case of beer and walking up and down the stands?
I said he should do that.
Yeah.
Yep. I told him that would be a better thing to do, but he had other thoughts in mind.
You didn't want to. You wanted to jump right back in.
I wanted to get back where I was. It's almost like if I was going to go back to a stand, it's almost like that was going to be a cheat, and I didn't want to go back to 50% or 75% or even 90%. I wanted to see if I could get back to exactly where I was. I ended up working 20 games last year, including a very, very, very short one-game playoff run.
Right, unfortunately. When did you find out that he was a beer vendor, and what was your response to that?
I found out, I think you had your heart attack on
It was a Wednesday.
It was a Wednesday. Nobody had talked to Eddie at all yet, because as soon as he got to the emergency room at Skokie, he was intubated. I think, did anybody at the police station actually talk to you?
I don't think I was in talking mode.
You presented and said, "I have chest pain," and you passed out.
And I collapsed. Yeah.
So nobody's actually had the opportunity to talk to Eddie when in those situations when you don't have that opportunity to actually talk to somebody or really know anything about them. The first thing you're going to do is try to save their life, and then figure out all the things afterwards. I think the Monday or Tuesday we were able to get the breathing tube out and able to have a conversation. So I can't remember.
I think it was I think I remember it was the Monday, because I think I remember waking up on Sunday and it was the Monday that we had our first conversation.
Yeah, you asked me something about going back to work, and I asked you what you did. He was a beer vendor, and that was my first realization. And I like, really? Wow, that's kind of funny. I must have laughed or smiled.
It was the expression on your face that it's like, okay, my first thought was, okay, then you're obviously a Cubs fan, because if you didn't know, if you weren't a baseball fan, you wouldn't know what I was talking about. And then the conversation just progressed from there.
I have a very weird job as a advanced heart failure doctor. The first thing I always think about when I have a patient is, are they a candidate for a heart transplant? Because I get very sick patients. The second thing that I think about is, can I get them back to their job? He told me what he did. I was like, how the hell am I going to get him back to that job?
I remember I remember you gave me all the worst case scenarios, all the things that might happen. And I remember appreciating the honesty. And I think initially you said, well, maybe you'll be able to get back by the end of the season. I think you said maybe by September. And I remember thinking, okay, then that's fine, because I wanted to get back. I want to get back this year. I remember thinking that getting back wasn't about selling the beer. It wasn't about making money. It was getting back to the ballpark was going to be a return to normalcy. And at that point, I knew that things would probably be okay after that. Because, like I said, if anybody knew what was involved in my job, obviously it was going to be you, because you can tell a million people what you do, but they can't relate to it, obviously. You could.
Having done that job, that was going to be a challenge. I already knew that from the get-go. A lot of times you can sort of get an idea of whether people really do want to go back to work, but clearly that was something very important to Eddie about getting back to work, and your love of that job. You know, that it's not about him making money. It's about that job, being at that ballpark, being part of that magical place. So once I got a good understanding of that, I figured he'd be able to get back. It just kind of timing of when, and he worked hard to get back to work.
Actually, some of the guys I still work with remember him.
Really?
Yeah, there are guys that have been there forever. There are guys that have been there 40, 50 years. And yeah, a couple of them still remember him.
What did they say when you told them?
One of them, it was actually kind of cute. He said, "So Rob's moved on to bigger and better things, huh?" And it's like, well, yeah, I would think so.
Right.
What's great about working at Wrigley, it's not just what I do, but it's cool that it's a tourist attraction. So a lot of people that I see on a daily basis are people from somewhere else. A good majority of people. Actually, I sold a beer to a girl from New Zealand yesterday, she showed me her New Zealand driver's license. Not many people get to meet, the kind of people that I meet on a daily basis.
So we just had a nice conversation with Eddie about what happened to him. He, at least the first several days, has had to kind of recreate it. So can you tell us what did happen to him? He said he's been really healthy his entire life, but then just obviously had a massive heart attack. But what does that mean exactly?
It can hit people that lead relatively healthy lives. And, some component is certainly going to be genetic. The recognition of those symptoms, chest pains, feeling short of breath, diaphoretic or sweaty. People will often feel sort of jaw pain on your left side. You can have it on your right side too. Sometimes you can get referred pain that goes down your left arm. Just recognition of those symptoms are very important to try to get to at least a hospital, or, where Eddie ended up at the police department, to get treatment right away. The most important thing is, at least we think at the moment, is to get those vessels, any blocked vessels, opened as soon as possible when people are having a heart attack. And the common thing that does happen when people have heart attacks is the heart muscle is not getting enough oxygen, and it's having some damage that's occurring to it. And so the electrical systems in the heart get a little unstable. And he had what was called a ventricular arrhythmia, that is really a non-perfusing rhythm, meaning that you can't get any blood flow to the rest of the body. So you oftentimes lose consciousness. But if you don't have something done right away, you will very likely pass away. Fortunate enough for Eddie, he happened to be in a location where somebody recognized immediately what was going on and got access to a defibrillator, put that on, and he was defibrillated in the police department.
And so this was all caused by a blockage, and it was the widowmaker. Is that what they call it? Or
that is one that he had. He has you have three arteries, two arteries that come off the aorta, and one that splits into two. And the one that is called the widowmaker is called the left anterior descending artery that comes down the front of the heart and provides the majority of blood flow to the main pumping chamber of the heart. And so that is the common artery that does result in death if you don't do anything about getting that open.
When he got to Skokie Hospital, was he stented there?
They took him emergently to the cath lab as soon as he got into the emergency room and saw his EKG. He had to be intubated to sort of help control his airway. The interventional cardiologist, when they put these people in the cath lab, they are trying to focus a lot on the heart issues. And if all these other things are happening, it's a little bit more difficult to try to concentrate on that. So have one of either the ER attending or one of the anesthesiologists help to control his airway, and that allowed the interventional cardiologist to focus on his arteries.
And that was Dr. Philip Krause, I think, right?
Yeah.
And so they took him up to the cath lab then, and what happens there?
So they are put in all their catheters, usually either through a radial artery or through a femoral artery. And the catheters go up into the heart and inject dye into the main arteries and see kind of where the blockages are. You know, with based on his EKG and sort of kind of what was going on, I think Dr. Krause had a pretty good idea of what was going to be blocked. And when he got there, sure enough, the LED was blocked. And the next period of time is really trying to spend opening that up. Unfortunately, Eddie continued to have multiple episodes of ventricular arrhythmias, and I think he got shocked about 17 times.
Wow.
In the cath lab. And that's at least the report that I've read a couple of times from Dr. Krause. He responded very appropriately. We were able to get him out of cardiogenic shock. We were able to get the rest of his body perfused. We were able to get his lungs cleared out, and like when I met him that morning, I was able to get the the breathing tube out. And then over the next couple of days, just sort of evaluated his need for that pump ongoing, and I was able to wean the pump down to the point where I said, I told my partner, Dr. Russell, that I think he was fine to try to go ahead and take it out, which everybody was ecstatic about. And
I remember that morning. I think that was the Thursday that I left the ICU, and I remember that when you said, you know what, we're going to take you off the machine today, and I knew that was really good news.
So Eddie, I know you don't remember this, but how does that make you feel kind of hearing about this and being shocked 17 times?
Actually, it's not the first time I'm hearing it, but hearing it again doesn't make it any less dramatic. Again, like I said before, medical science has never been better. If I would have had this heart attack when my dad had his, we're not having this conversation, because you can have the best equipment and the best that modern medicine has to offer, but if you don't have the right people using this equipment or knowing how to use it or knowing how to apply it, then it's worthless. And of course, I have Dr. Gordon and an army of people to thank, and couldn't thank him enough times over the next 100 years if I had.
Dr. Gordon, are you surprised at his progress? Or I know he was back at Wrigley Field at the end of July, you said, right?
It was a little less than 4 months, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I have to say yes. The reality of people that have something similar to Eddie in regards to the heart attack, he not only had a heart attack, but he had what we call cardiogenic shock, where the heart is just not able to support the functions of the rest of the body. And mortality, if we go back to 1984, when I was beer vendor, mortality in STEMI or an acute myocardial infarction in the Widowmaker with cardiogenic shock, mortality at 30 days was about 80%. And you'd think with all the modern medicine and the things that we have today, the mortality is still fairly high, anywhere from 30 to 50% at 30 days. To go from having that to lifting cases of beer and shuffling them around the ballpark 4 months later is not a miracle of modern medicine. It's a miracle of the human body. So yes, the way you keep your body and throughout your lifetime does impact kind of how you're able to tolerate a lot of the insults. Mm-hmm. And so if Eddie didn't have as active a lifestyle and didn't take care of himself as well as he has done, he'd be in probably a different spot. Yeah.
I think one of the first things I asked you that I remember is, does my previous active lifestyle have anything to do with keeping me alive? And the answer was yes, because like I mentioned, my friend before, who died last month, he was a vendor, but like I said, he was a big guy and he wasn't very active. He was a teacher for 30 years. So being that he was inactive before his heart attack didn't give him a chance to survive the heart attack. So I can almost say quite literally, my active lifestyle, I'm working at Wrigley Field, saved my life because it's allowed me to get past this and then move forward.
I say his ejection fraction is pretty close to normal. It's not normal. There is some damage to the heart itself. He had a different type of test done to look at the muscle tissue itself called a cardiac MRI. And probably about 20-30% of his heart is going to be scar tissue. But the rest of his heart sort of has compensated for that. And he's on, I think you're on about 4 or 5 medicines.
Six.
Six to really try to prevent the heart from itself from remodeling and help it function appropriately.
And are there other kind of any restrictions or what are your recommendations for a patient like that as far as, diet and exercise? And
Eddie has heard me say this ad nauseum. Diet's important, keeping your weight stable, exercising on a regular basis. The American Heart Association recommends 150 minutes of moderate activity per week. And I think Eddie gets more than that. Sleeping is important. You have to make sure you get appropriate sleep and trying to reduce stress in your life is all important. There was actually a recent study, and sorry for the people out there that are enjoying the ball games, that looked at alcohol consumption and atrial fibrillation, and lo and behold, avoiding alcohol consumption seemed to have an impact on reducing the occurrence of atrial fibrillation. So those are all important things to do, and certainly staying away from smoking is going to be important.
So when you were in rehab, Eddie, did you ever bring a case of beer with you to rehab and carry it around?
I did not. I wanted my first case of beer to be at the ballpark.
Yeah.
On the job.
Yeah. Well, great. I want to wrap it up because I know, Dr. Gordon, your beeper is going off, and maybe there's another Eddie out there who's in need of care. So I don't want to keep you too long. But I want to thank you both for coming in and talking to us about this amazing case.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to see the ballpark anytime soon?
Yes, you are. I got to get some tickets. Kids need to go to the ball game.
But when you do, let me know when you come out to the ballpark, and then I'll come say hi. And so
will do.
Yeah.
Does Dr. Gordon get a free beer?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll make sure I tip him though.
Nice.
The first one's on me. Yes, absolutely. That's the benefit of knowing a beer vendor, friends and family.
Yeah.
The friends and family discount. Yes.
Nice. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Healthy You podcast from NorthShore University Health System. I want to thank Eddie Rajczyk for joining us and telling his story, and Dr. Robert Gordon for providing his perspective on cardiology and beer vending. I also want to thank our producer and editor, Jon Hillenbrand, for helping make this happen. Please continue to tune in to the Healthy You podcast as we explore hot topics in health and medicine.
Number 15, third baseman, Ryan Anderson.